We are just back from 4 nights on a vacation up to Illinois for my niece Allie's wedding. She married her longtime boyfriend Jim. We had a great time. We camped and just had a fabulous time. Upon returning home though, you know, you've got to do all your laundry and get everything done. And the table over there where my tomatoes ripen, I had a whole table full that I had to process. So if you can hear in the background the rumbling sound, that's my water bath canner going. I'm canning some pizza sauce. And I also had, you know, laundry to do. And unfortunately, while I was hanging my laundry the other day, I got into a bunch of ants. While we were gone, Hi guys, Jackie from Famished Farm. You know, I usually am standing up in the kitchen when I do a cooking video, but today I am exhausted. We went on a 4-night camping vacation. My niece, Allie, married her longtime boyfriend, Jim, on my brother's farm up north, and that's near Caledonia, Illinois. And we camped at Rock Cut State Park up there. That's the park that we camped at as kids all the time, all summer long. And we had just such a great time. My sister and her husband, my nephew and his wife camped right across from us. We had bonfire every night. And it's just a fun vacation. But that leaves you a ton of stuff to get done. And normally I would have had all of that stuff done on Monday, but when I was doing laundry, I apparently got in a bunch of fire ants. When Hurricane Francine went through our area and dumped about 8¼ inches of rain, all of the ants in the yard have relocated, and there's new mounds that my husband treated, the ones he saw, but around the laundry spinner where I dry my clothes, there was no new mound, but unfortunately there were lots of fire ants in the area. And actually I only have about 3 bites on me, but I was very allergic to those ant bites. I'm becoming very reactive. My doctor just prescribed an EpiPen just in case. But all of the hives, the welts, the redness, after taking medication, all of that is gone. It's now Wednesday, and I am ready to get done everything that I need to get done as far as those tomatoes that I'm preserving. And I've got 2 new recipes for you that I cooked before we left, and those I'll tell you about. First up, from Real Simple Magazine, the most recent issue that I have is August 2024. I have a Bahn me inspired pork burger. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. This is the article that it came off of. That recipe is fantastic. We did a half a recipe. We had leftovers, obviously. It was delicious. I can recommend that, but we'll show you how we made that. Our second recipe from foodnetwork.com, the reason I made this one is tons of tomatoes. Your tomatoes are probably coming in wherever you're at. And so this was a savory cobbler. It's called corn and tomato cobbler with cheddar herb biscuits. And this one also, we did a half a recipe. It was really good. We ate the entire half a recipe over a 2-night period. Delicious, a great way to use up some tomatoes in a different way that's different than just a tomato sandwich or a BLT or just sliced tomatoes. So give it a try, guys. It was really good. Now, I don't show you in this video, but I'm also making dog food over there. So as I'm taping the video, if you happen to see a large bowl of meat and rice, that is the dog food that I'm also making my little dog. I make her homemade dog food now, and I'm letting that cool. I cooked all the meat while the tomatoes were roasting in the oven, and that meat is now cooled, the rice is cooled, and it needs to go into her little baggies and into the freezer. I'm waiting for that to cool, but I think it's probably good enough to do now. So I'm going to show you the cherry tomato recipe, and I actually used all my cherry tomatoes and the Romas that I had in this recipe, and I believe I had about 10 pounds of probably like 4 pounds of cherries and the rest in Romas. I've adapted the freezer recipe for that cherry tomato pizza sauce that I saw Living Traditions put up. And I basically use the Ball Canning book oven roasted marinara recipe, but just adapt it a little bit for pizza sauce. The proportions of the tomatoes, onion, garlic is the same, and I roast that in the oven. The spices are basically the same, but instead of using, call for either citric acid and lemon juice and wine. I'm using just lemon juice in each of the jars, and it basically is a tablespoon per jar. Guys, I'll show you how I did that. And I just appreciate you being here. If you like our content, please like and subscribe and leave us a comment. We're always looking for healthy recipes. I'd love to know what your favorite healthy recipes are that you kind of make on repeat. So simple, easy ingredients, not super expensive, things that can be put in a weekly rotation. Let me know what's going on in your world, guys. Let's get cooking. For our tomato cobbler, I'm going to kind of mess up the directions a little. I'm going to start by sauteing some onions in butter, and I'm doing a half a recipe. So I'm doing half an onion over there. I've got 2 medium-sized tomatoes instead of the 3 large the recipe calls for, and we're just going to cut those into roughly 1-inch chunks. I'm leaving the skin on. The recipe doesn't specify, so leave the skin on, guys. Then we're going to switch back over to the cast iron, and it says it's going to take about 5 minutes to saute these onions. You're just going to do these till they're soft and translucent or slightly brown. And once you've reached that, you're going to add some garlic. It calls for 2 cloves minced. I'm just going to use about a half a teaspoon of dried garlic, and it calls for some peppers. I'm just going to use a shake of my cayenne pepper instead of the 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper, and give that a stir and let it continue sauteing, and that garlic will become very fragrant. Just another minute or so. And then we're going to add that chopped tomato. And then you're going to season with salt and pepper. Just do it to your taste, guys. And then we're going to stir that together once we've got these seasonings in. And then you're just going to let this simmer. You're going to turn the heat down a bit and then just let it cook an additional 4 or 5 minutes. And I think I did the 4-minute end of that. You just want a gentle simmer. So you'll see I'll turn the heat down. Back on the countertop, I'm using my basil out of the freezer, and it calls for about 3 tablespoons. I'm doing about half that because this is half a recipe. You're going to thinly slice, or in my case, this is more of a chop probably. I've got my cherry tomatoes ready. I'm just using a cup. And I've got a full bag of corn. You know, I'm not even sure how much corn is in there. It called for a 1.5 cups. That's probably a bit more than that. Then we're going to set that aside and get ready for our biscuits. This is a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup of cornmeal. It specifies yellow, and I would have no problem using white instead of yellow if that's what you've got. We'll add a teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar, and then I need to move back over to the skillet again. We're going to give that a quick stir, and then we're going to add our cherry tomatoes, the corn, and the basil, and we'll give that all a good stir. Once you're all mixed up here, be sure to give it a taste test and just make sure that you've added the appropriate amount of seasonings for your family. Once you're okay on your seasoning, you're going to turn off the heat, and you can just pull this off the heat and set it to the side. Back at our biscuit mix, we're going to add some salt, little pepper, and we'll give that a mix just to mix the dry ingredients together. And then I'm going to take the butter out of the fridge. It calls for cold butter, and I'm using half, of course, because I'm having this part of the recipe too, so only 3 tablespoons of butter. And then I'll use my pastry mixer to kind of get these into roughly pea-sized pieces. The recipe says you can use your hands for this also. I just have this little gadget, so I tend to use it even if I'm not very good at using it. Then I'm going to get my little cheese shredder out and shred in a couple tablespoons of sharp cheddar. Then I'm going to add some more fresh basil. I'll have to cut up a little bit more of that. And because I don't have chives, I am going to just use a sprinkle of onion powder. And then we're adding about 1/3 cup of the buttermilk. And now the recipe says to just work it until a sticky dough forms. And keep in mind that on biscuits, you don't want to overwork the dough. So what I'm going to do is mix these ingredients, the dry ingredients and the spices. I'm going to mix that with just a spoon just to get them mostly incorporated. And then I'm going to add my milk, kind of create a little well there in the center, and then mix gently with a fork or whatever utensil you've got handy. Once you're all mixed up, you're going to move back over to your skillet and gently dollop roughly 1/4 cup portions of the biscuit mix onto your tomato mix. Then into a 350-degree oven where you're going to bake this for about an hour. And then it says to pull it out of the oven and let it rest for 15 minutes. Guys, this was delicious. You're going to want to serve it warm. And like I said, we made a half recipe and we ended up eating this 2 nights in a row, loved it both nights. Our Bahn Me inspired pork burgers from Real Simple. I love this magazine, guys. I've had this subscription, I think, since just about the magazine came out, and I get new recipes from it every month. So we're starting with a small saucepan, and I'm having this recipe. So about 1/4 cup of rice vinegar, a heaping tablespoon of brown sugar, and a little bit of salt, and I'm going to add that to the saucepan. And then I'm not even going to pull a spoon out, I don't think. I'm just going to kind of whirl it around. We're just going to bring this to a boil, and we want that sugar to dissolve. So I check it a couple times, make sure that the sugar's dissolving, and of course I've got a couple little hard spots from my brown sugar. This takes just a couple minutes. Once we get it up to boiling, we're going to pull it off the heat. And then we've got some shredded carrots. It calls for matchstick carrots. We're going to add those to this simple syrup, basically, and make sure that the carrots are as submerged as you can get them. And then just set this to the side. Over on the countertop, we're going to make our special sauce for this particular burger. We're going to start with some mayonnaise and then sriracha. And I will tell you, I made this a little bit hot. It calls for 3 tablespoons of sriracha, and I added half of that, maybe even 1/3 of that, and it was still a little hot for us. And then a little bit of garlic, and we'll mix that all together. Guys, we never use all the sauce that any of these recipes call for. So I've got a new little trick that when I have leftover sauce like this, I just add it to my homemade ranch salad dressing and put it on our salads at lunchtime. So adding it to some other ranch that was already in the jar made it, that heat came down just enough that it was really delicious. It added just an extra little kick for us at lunch. And moving on to our pork mixture, we're starting with a tablespoon of fish sauce. Guys, I'm just using oyster sauce. Use whatever you've got. And as you can see, I'm just trying to coax this out of the bottle. And again, I'm going to add some brown sugar, about a heaping tablespoon of brown sugar there. And some more sriracha. I could have added more into the burger itself, would have been fine, and some salt. And then just mix that up a little bit. That is some onion powder. called for shallots, don't have them, so just a hint of onion will do the trick, and mix. Now the recipe called for 2 pounds of ground pork. I am using this, I think it's a 1 pound package, but guys, this could be actually 1.25 pounds. I'm not quite sure. And it's come out of the freezer, so I'm kind of chunking it up just to make mixing it up a little bit easier. It was still just very slightly frozen. And our recipe says to mix this until it's well combined. Now, because that mayonnaise-based sauce was a little hot, I did do less sriracha in this pork mixture. I could have easily done the whole 2 tablespoons that was called for. Now, I'm going to shape these into balls. I'm just trying to get them all roughly the same shape. If you are making a full recipe, you're obviously going to have 8 good-sized burgers. These made nice-sized burgers. And while I'm doing this, I realize that I really should be putting these right on my grill pan. So I'm going to kind of reset here for a second and pull out my grill pan. And then I start putting the burger patties into the grill pan, and I realize, oops, I didn't spray. So that's what you see me doing here, trying to account for that. And we will get back. Oh, I've got to go wash my hands, of course. So here we go. We're back getting our patties formed, and they fit nicely in the grill basket. And these grilled up beautifully, guys. Rod grilled these over medium-high heat, and it says to check your temperature at 160, and it takes about 5 minutes per side. I know Rod does longer than that. He likes pork to be done. Now, we both really enjoyed this. Even with that spicy sauce, these were delicious. It was just unusual enough, just not your typical hamburger. And that extra little punch of the pickled carrots on top really set it apart. So we will be making this again, and be sure you toast your bun, guys. That makes it, doesn't it? Guys, I've been saving my Roma tomatoes and my cherry tomatoes all season for this recipe. Now, I did make this earlier in the season, but I followed more of the directions that Living Traditions used in making this. She was following a freezer pizza sauce recipe, and her recipe had olive oil in it and was a little different, so specifically for freezer preservation. I decided to make this following more the Ball canning book oven roasted marinara recipe, and I think this is my favorite thing of this year, this pizza sauce. It makes a thick pizza sauce. My one that I made from the original Ball canning book last year was nice, but it was just too runny. And so I end up kind of straining it to use in pizza sauce now, which it works. It's delicious, but it just doesn't have the right consistency. This one, I promise you, does. Now, this is not an approved canning recipe. Even though I'm basically following the proportions of the recipe in the Ball canning book, I've made some changes. So do this at your own risk. This is not a tested recipe, but this is a delicious recipe, guys. So I've got that big table that was full of cherry and Roma tomatoes from when I came home from vacation. Plus I had a bunch of tomatoes in the freezer. So what I'm working on now, I've already done the cherry tomatoes. I basically dumped them out of the bag and they went right into the oven. Didn't do anything with them except for put them on a cookie sheet, a rimmed cookie sheet, and they went into the oven. These Roma tomatoes, however, we are going to cut them in half. And because they're still slightly frozen, I've got them in this water. I'm hoping I can knock off any of the iciness that is is on them. And that iciness, guys, it's coming from sitting in this water, unfortunately. So anyway, we're gonna cut these in half and get them into, these are 9x13 pans. And I am glad I used the 9x13 pans on these because they do release lots of juice. Last year, I used the juice that I would get from recipes like this to make canned tomato juice. But I found I just did not enjoy using that tomato juice. I was putting it in my bone broth to make a tomato-based bone broth. And as the winter went on, I just liked it less and less. So this year, my tomato juice from these tomatoes is going into my compost pile. Now, please leave me a comment because last year I put all of my seeds from canning into my compost, but those were seeds that were not cooked. And I'm hoping this year that by baking these seeds in the oven for 40 minutes to an hour, that I'm going to be rendering those seeds useless. If you know any different, please let me know because I really am getting tired of cherry tomato plants volunteering all over my yard, in my lettuce containers, in my herb containers. Everywhere that I use compost, I have cherry tomatoes. Anyway, if you guys know the answer to that, let me know. This recipe took quite a while because I did not fire up my bottom oven. I kind of wish I had. I could have been doing this in about half the time. I forgot that I was going to roast the cloves of garlic and the onion separately, and so I kind of had to double back and do that after these Roma tomatoes came out of the oven, which was a little bit of a pain, but not a huge pain. It gave me a chance to clean up the kitchen. As you will see, my kitchen gets pretty wiped out during this day of cooking. In addition to this pizza sauce that I'm working on, I also have my dog's homemade dog food that I'm cooking meat and rice for. And it was quite a day filled with dirty dishes. And at one point, I just couldn't think anymore. And I had to stop what I was doing and get the kitchen cleaned up. You will probably notice that my aromas are not very big. In fact, they're pretty tiny. They're the size of a large grape tomato in some cases, which is kind of embarrassing, but it is what it is. I think the heat stress this summer just really impacted these tomatoes, and I just didn't have much luck other than my cherry tomatoes. And even the cherry tomatoes, everything I picked this summer, I picked when it was blushing, so I wouldn't have the issue with the bottom of the tomato being red and the top of the tomato being yellow. That was early in the season what I was getting, but I found if I pulled them off when they were just starting to blush, then they would ripen fully. So that's what we're hoping for this year, the rest of the year. So this 10 pounds of tomatoes, or a little more than 10 pounds, ended up taking 3 cake pans and 2 cookie sheets. And then I had to put one of the cake pans back in with the onions and the garlic. But all in all, filled them up pretty nicely. I was pretty happy. Here we are. These are the cherry tomatoes that I put in earlier. These have been in 350 oven for 45 minutes and they look perfect to me. Now, obviously these have skins on and they still have the seeds in them, but I'm using a high-powered blender, so I'm not going to worry about that in the least. So I am going to boot the temperature up to 375 when I put the Romas in, and that will stay in for about 45 minutes. I kept an eye on them. They were starting to roast nicely, and I almost took them out early, but 45 minutes was the cooking time on the Romas. And here we are getting the first 2 pans in, and we're going to finish up this last pan. This is the first year that I'm freezing tomatoes and kind of working in smaller batches as the season progresses. And I've been reading that the tomatoes actually, if you let them thaw in the refrigerator, they release a ton of juice before you even do this. So if you're just making like crushed tomatoes, just canning the tomatoes directly out of the freezer, then that's a great way to reduce some of the juice of the tomato and just get the meaty parts. Okay, that is a wrap for that third pan that is going into the oven. Back over at the cherry tomatoes, these have cooled just a little, so a little easier to work with. I'm just going to put these directly into some 4-cup Pyrex measuring vessels here, and I'm using a slotted spatula to scoop them up off of that juice and letting them drain a little bit as I go into these 4-cup measures. And what I'm finding is the juice still pools in the bottom of this 4-cup measure, which is perfectly fine because I'm just going to dump that out when I'm up to the 4-cup level. And as I said, all of that juice is going into my compost. And I pull out the second 4-cup measure, and we'll finish scooping this the second pan of cherry tomatoes into that measure. It's kind of interesting the difference in the juice here. One of these pans was the frozen tomatoes, and one was just refrigerated tomatoes that came off the table I've got going in the dining room. That's just for ripening. And I wish I could tell you which was which, but I just don't remember. And there you see I was pouring off the extra liquid, and now we've reached 45 minutes on the aromas. Don't those look great? And we're going to take out all the pans. Now, this is a good time to take a little break. And I am of the impatient variety, so I go right from the oven over to the pan, and I'm going to try to remove the skins on these romas because they are just basically sitting on the top of these tomatoes ready to come off. But they don't all come off perfectly, and these are super, super hot. I do not have calluses on my fingertips like some cooks have, so this was painful. Oh, there I am. The rice is done cooking. I had to give that a fluff. So this takes way longer than it should because it's really hot, but I do get all of these skins off and into the compost pile. This probably took 5 minutes to do, just because I was trying not to burn myself, and I timed it on the pans that I did that were cooled, and it took just over a minute once they're cooled. So let them cool, guys. And then same procedure as before. We'll put these into our 4-cup measure, and then the juice will go into the compost. And I'm going to do the same thing. If there's excess juice in these measuring cups, I am going to just kind of drain it out before I put them in with the cherry tomatoes. Because I'm making half of the recipe that the ball book calls for, I'm going to use half of the onions, so it calls for 2 medium. I'm just going to use this one yellow onion, and I'm going to thinly slice it and then separate the slices into this cake pan. This is a cake pan that I just used to cook the Roma tomatoes. And once those are all separated, then I pull out my cloves of garlic, and again I'm using half of the garlic that the recipe calls for, 3 cloves instead of the 6 cloves, and we'll add that to the pan and get that into the oven to roast. Okay, and this one is now 375, and we're going to end up leaving that in the oven for 25 minutes, just a little longer than the recipe called for. I added a little bit of extra time just to get them to brown a little. Now, this is the point of the day where my brain just couldn't handle the mess anymore. So I'm going to quickly get all of these dishes handled and wipe down my countertops, and then I can function once again. Anybody with OCD out there? I've been told I may have it. I don't know. But I just think better when things are neat and organized, and my brain just kind of shuts down when things get messy. So that's what I'm doing here, is just putting everything away. I film these things off camera, so to speak, because I step out of the frame so often to put things away. You know, they go back in the cupboards, back in the fridge. I go wash my hands, I clean a dish, I put it away. You know, there's lots of little interruptions that if I made you guys watch all of that, these videos would each be 2 hours long, which nobody wants to see. So that is part of the reason that I kind of cut these videos like I do in editing. And I think it makes them a better video. I don't know. What do you think? But anyway, we'll get this kitchen cleaned up, get the counters washed, and then we will get back to it. Now, these are the 2 pans that have cooled, and look at me fly through these. Literally in 2 minutes I can finish both pans. I think I just do 1 pan at a time, but it took just over a minute to take all these skins off. So it was very fast. And a couple of spots I did have to remove, bad spots in a tomato that I didn't catch when they went into the pan. So I'm kind of double checking everything as I go just to make sure. And then these are going into the 4-cup measure that you really can't see there. And we're draining them a bit as we go, but we will do the same thing. There, pour off the excess liquid, and there goes the juice into the compost. And then this is our last pan. Here we go. Skin's going off quick. It's a miracle, guys. Between the freezing and the roasting, the skins are not an issue. When I think of all the time I've spent scoring the bottoms of the tomatoes and blanching them and then putting them in an ice bath, oh my word, it just takes so much time. And honestly, most of the recipes that I use tomato products for can use the equivalent. This to me is the equivalent of a stewed tomato, a cooked tomato, chilies, salsa. All of those things are just delicious with this recipe. And now comes the part where I thought I was filming and I wasn't. So you miss the cooking of the tomatoes on the stovetop, and my only note on that is you really have to watch them for scorching. You've removed so much of the liquid. Keep an eye on them, stir them frequently. You'll bring them to a boil and then let them simmer for 15 to 20 minutes. And that's when obviously you're going to add all your spices too. Now, what did I add? I added a total of 8 tablespoons of lemon juice, the onion, the cloves that we talked about. I added 4 teaspoons of salt, 2.5 tablespoons of oregano, 2 tablespoons of parsley, 2 tablespoons of basil, and just 3 little sprinkles of cayenne pepper. And then I'm moving over to my high-speed blender, and I'm just putting, roughly 2/3 of the blender full. Doesn't matter. Go all the way if you want. This is just easier for me to pick up. There, look at that sauce. It's really good, guys. And I'm going to go then right into my... first, I'm going to double check the taste and just make sure that this is what I want my pizza sauce to taste like. It's delicious. It's going to go right into these jars. And I can use the pour spout. I don't have to even use my canning funnel this time. And we're going to leave an inch of headspace. And then we're going to do all the other canning things that you always do. Wipe your rims, debubble them, put clean canning lids on them. Not clean, put unused, fresh canning lids, not clean. You do want to just run them through some soapy water before you put them on the jars, and then tighten them with your rings. And I do end up having to get out a couple more canning jars. I think I had 6 jars here to start, and I'm happy to say that made 8.5 pints, so super nice. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is a KitchenAid blender. This belonged to my mom, and I almost, when she moved in with us, we got rid of duplicate appliances, and I almost made her get rid of this, and we almost kept my it just was prettier, my stainless steel. This is more of a matte silver finish appliance. It's not truly stainless steel. Mine was stainless steel, but it didn't have the power that this one had. And I'll be honest, the first batch of margaritas we ever made with this, the ice was pulverized in a minute, not even a minute, and it just is a great blender. So I'm happy to have it. It's not a Ninja, it's not a Vitamix or whatever those are, but it is an awesome blender. So guys, this took 3 batches in the blender, and like I said, just a couple of minutes of blending, and it turned out beautifully. I'm so happy with this recipe. I hope the canning police don't kill me for enjoying this recipe. But it's a delicious recipe. Listen, I do see that I left an inch of headspace. I should have only left a half an inch. My bad. And I did process these for 40 minutes. I had that right anyway. You really need to reread your recipes, guys. Do as I say, not as I do. And I need to remember that. I'm getting too old, making too many mistakes. But anyway, we're going to clean this last bit out of the pan and into the blender, and we'll finish up this day's canning. For those of you worried about not following an approved recipe, let me just recommend that you go to the original Ball canning book, the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, and on page 364 is the pizza sauce recipe I followed last year. Now, what I would do though is go ahead and roast your tomatoes. And then when you get to step 2, that is your puree. It calls for 13 cups, which is exactly what I had. And you could easily just add a half a cup of lemon juice, which I did, 2 tablespoons of oregano, a teaspoon of pepper, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of garlic powder. I added more spices than that, but as I said, it was a perfectly fine pizza sauce. It's just, I think the roasting of the tomatoes adds so much more. It just was absolutely delicious. Okay, here we are debubbling. We're getting all the air pockets out of these jars. Sauce is kind of thick, so you want to make sure that there are no little pockets of air. And I do kind of set them down hard on the countertop, and in a couple cases send some splatters going. Then I'm going to wash my new canning lids. The jar that went into the refrigerator, I'm using an already used canning lid for that, because that does not need to be water bath canned. Then I'm going to clean off all the rims, put the new lids on each of the jars, and then I have my canning rings, and I will tighten them. Once I have resistance, then I will finger tighten them, and I do that for each of the jars. Now, I have also started my water bath canning pot. So I've got some water on the stovetop that's heating up. Now, I know this is not enough water, and because my jars are not boiling hot, I'm adding this cold water so that the jars more evenly match the temperature of the water. We're going to fit 7 pints in here. And this is just my stock pot that I use for this. Wish it fit 8 because that's what I had today is 8 pints, but that's okay. We'll do 2 batches here. And then I check my water level using my tongs for an inch of water over, at least an inch of water over these jars. And then I'm going to turn, oh, look what I forgot. I couldn't find it actually, and then I just found it. So we'll add any water if we need to. Turn our temperature up so we can get this water boiling. And then we'll put a lid on it too. So we're going for a full rolling boil on this, guys. And I'm gonna adjust my temperature. Once I come to that full boil, I adjust my temperature down. This is a high heat burner, so high output. I'm not sure what they call it exactly, but it gets really hot. So I adjust the temperature down so it maintains that boil. And then I boil for 40 minutes, take them off the heat, let them rest for 5 without the lid on, and then they go onto the towel. And here you can see is the last jar coming out of the water bath. This is my 5-minute timer. And here it is going on to the towel with the 7 other jars that have already been water bath canned. Mission accomplished. Good job. Guys, thanks for being here. We've caught up with what we needed to accomplish after vacation. Please leave a comment down below and like and subscribe us if you like our content. We'll see you in the kitchen next time.